Twist had never felt so heavy. She tried to compare it with the lazy drowsiness that could come over you during a hot summer's day, or while blissfully snoozing on a bed in a lazy, sunny afternoon. Both of these came accompanied by a sensation of heavy limbs that most ponies would be quite familiar with, and which wasn't altogether unpleasant. But this was different. It was as if she could feel a weight pressing down on her chest, which troubled her breathing and left her unable to move. She tried to open her eyes, but found that she could not. She felt she ought to be disturbed or even frightened by this notion, but somehow she couldn't bring herself to care. Her mind had been weighed down as well. Time became a mullible principle to her, without much use or merit. She didn't know how long she'd been like that, but she knew it didn't matter. Slowly but surely, the effect lessened. She began to become aware of things she had once known, but which she had forgotten. The thumping sound in her ears became the beating of her heart. The gentle whisper became the rhythm of her breathing, and she became aware of a crucial distinction. There was the world, and there was her body, and these two were surely not the same. For the world was the world, and she was Twist. Yes, that was her name, Twist. And so she finally opened her eyes. It proved to be rather anticlimactic, as she didn't seem to be able to see anything at all at first. Her eyes adjusted to the poor light conditions slowly, but all she could see was one big blur of dark, depressing colors. She could hear stone groaning under its own weight all around, and the clanking of metal to her left. She tried to move, but to her great surprise, she was still not able to. This puzzled her. Didn't she finally wake up? Where was she, anyways? The memories started flooding back to her. Her bag, the classroom, Cheerilee, a horrible taste in her mouth. With a shock, she realized what had happened. And so, the reason why she couldn't move became abundantly clear. Finally fully awake, she could tell that some kind of metal clasps were holding her legs together, so that the back of her body was pressed up against some kind of cold, rough surface, presumably one of the walls. She did her best not to panic, but she could already feel the buildup of adrenaline inside, ready to release at the first useful, or not so useful, opportunity. She started struggling against her bonds, letting out a few grunts and moans in effort with the process. "Ah, you are finally awake." The voice originated from somewhere to her left, and Twist turned her head towards it as best she could. The only thing she was able to make out was a hazy fuchsia blob amidst the dull blacks and grays, which rapidly approached her. It slowly expanded until it filled almost all of her vision field, and Twist closed her eyes fearfully, for she felt something being slid onto her head. When she finally worked up the courage to open them again, she could see her surroundings crystal clear. She had regained her glasses, but wished she did not. She found herself inside of a stone building of sorts, although it wasn't any she had ever seen in Ponyville. The stone slabs in the room had been constructed with a huge and of a particular shade of black as well. The room was fairly small, and much wider than it was long. The ceiling was surprisingly high up, which gave the room an extra sense of space, and particularly enough of the blocks of stone gave way to a series of metal bars just underneath the ceiling. Twist could see another room, or perhaps a hallway, behind the bars, but she wasn't sure. There was an open doorway right across from her. and it led off into a hallway, illuminated just as badly as this room. Twist noticed she couldn't actually see a source of light there. It was almost as if the room had a supply of light all of its own. 2 saddlebags were lying on the floor to her left, but she could not make out the contents, although some were definitely metallic in nature. Twist took in all of this in the second it took her to become aware of Cheerilee, who was standing right in front of her, staring at her intently while wearing a pleasant smile. "I hope you slept well, because you probably won't sleep again for a while," she said in an almost motherly tone of voice. "But then again, you'll be sleeping for a long, long time right after that, so it's probably not worth losing any sleep over it." Twist felt a block of ice descend into her stomach. The strange contrast between her teacher's tone of voice and the meaning of her words only serving to increase the dread she was feeling. "Please, you can't kill me. I haven't done anything wrong," the filly stammered, her eyes slowly starting to glisten with tears. Cheerilee walked over to her saddlebags and started to rummage around inside, clearly looking for something. "But I'm afraid I must," she said with an obvious excitement. "It's not so much about what you've done, but about what you're going to end up doing. I had forgotten how strong your ties with Applebloom were. She got to you." She pulled out a leather pouch containing various clamps and knives, and threw it down in front of Twist. "But, more importantly, I can't have you talk," she said as she took a knife from the pouch and brought it to her lips, next to Twist's ear. "You didn't tell any pony it was me, right?" Twist swallowed, her entire body shivering in fear as tears slowly trickled down her cheeks. Her situation appeared hopeless, but even though she was scared, she didn't want to give up just yet. I told lots of people. I told every pony it was you. They didn't believe me. But if I disappear, they'll know. So you better let me go. If you leave me alone, I'll tell them I was wrong," she shouted at Cheerilee, putting on the most defiant face she had in her. Which wasn't all that defiant, but the effort was certainly there. Cheerilee pulled back slightly at the look, and looked Twist in the eyes, a bemused look on her face. "Oh, Twist, you're such a bad liar," she hissed. The filly's eyes exploded with fear, and Cheerilee instantly stabbed forward, driving the knife deep into Twist's right shoulder. She screamed, and blood welled up around the blade as it sliced through muscle and tendons. It hit bone soon enough, but Cheerilee didn't care. She simply threw her weight behind it again, jamming the knife right into the shoulder joint. The sharp pain almost made Twist's eyes roll back in her head, and her screams transformed into a choking gurgling. Cheerilee drank it in with intense fascination. It had been too long. Really. She lessened the pressure on the blade a bit. "Ready to tell me the truth?" Apart from some scraped knees, Twist really hadn't any experience with such pain before, and Cheerilee's crash course was shocking. She could feel a hot, throbbing pain where Cheerilee had sliced up tendons and muscle. It felt like 1,000 needles got jammed between her shoulder blade and her upper right leg bone every time she breathed in or out. It was almost too much for her, but she didn't feel like giving up just yet. She was probably doomed, but there was a chance Twilight would discover something, and one day Cheerilee to justice. No, pony, I, told... No, Pony. Cheerilee smiled, and then suddenly twisted the knife around in Twist's shoulder joint. She licked her lips, as the screams sent shivers down her spine. Very cute. But, as I said, you're such a bad liar. Okay! Twilight, I showed her the bloody planks. The theater, she sobbed. Cheerilee pulled back the knife, finally satisfied. Twist whimpered as the blade left her, and the sensation of pain changed again. It became less pressing, but the wound pounded all the more. She looked down at her own body, and the trail of blood that flowed down. It was already beginning to pool underneath her right hoof, and the sight sickened her. She never realized just how much blood there was inside of her before. She felt herself go green when Cheerilee casually licked the knife's blade. So, Twilight Sparkle, she said ponderously. If it's her, she might find us here. She'll only be looking for you, though, not me. There's no reason to kill her, either. And she'll probably bring her friends. Her friends. The realization shocked her, like a plunge in an icy lake right after a sauna. For several isolated facts and ideas gathered all together to combine into one glorious whole. For many months she had asked herself one single question. How could so many fillies suddenly go bad in a town where every pony was exemplary? But now she finally understood why. Twilight's friends. Rarity was Sweetie Belle's sister. Applejack was Apple Bloom's, and Rainbow Dash was Scootaloo's idol. Snips and Snails seemed to have taken quite a liking to her as well, and they ran into the entire bunch often enough. Anyway, Pinkie Pie had been with the girls fairly often, and it was no secret that Fluttershy and Rarity preferred babysitters. Or sister-sitter. Whatever. Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon had had the least contact with those five, but she supposed there were always exceptions to the rule. They could have been rotten from the start. She could accept that happening to one or two fillies, not just 7 at once. Or else they had just felt the need to step up their game to match their rivals, the Cutie Mark Crusaders. Their corruption could all be traced back to the influence of those 5 mares, and they in turn had been influenced by Twilight Sparkle. She had heard that the bigger cities had become more immoral and filthier in the last few years, and that the royal family had it especially bad. She had just never imagined it was this bad. There was no way she could set everything right, but she could protect Ponyville. She could make a stand. Yes! Yes! She exclaimed almost triumphantly. Let them come! They won't be arriving until tomorrow at the earliest. If they come at all, I'll be ready. I can finally end this, once and for all. She could see it now, the culprits, and the punishment she'd bestow upon them. You're crazy, said the still teary-eyed Twist, through clenched teeth. Twilight is powerful. The will... Cheerilee laughed heartily. Oh, but that's the beauty of it. No matter how fancy her magic is, it's useless in here. She drew closer with the knife again, and Twist didn't dare move or utter so much as a single syllable. She stared at the bloody knife fearfully, the pounding of her violated shoulder reminding her of the damage and agony it could inflict. She realized the pain in her shoulder would probably have left already, her unable to think straight, if not for the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I'm surprised you didn't try asking me where we are yet," Cheerilee said, as she rested the knife against Twist's chest. "But, I'll tell you anyway. A little story from Cheerilee, before you die." The filly wanted to protest her bleak future, but she had used up all her courage and energy already. Just coping with the pain was hard enough already, and her lips trembled as tears again rolled over her cheeks. She breathed only shallowly, for fear of the knife pressing against her chest. "I was once a little filly like you, and at that time, I too had a friend who was very dear to me. His name was Ace High," said Cheerilee as she looked Twist in the eye. "He was a self-proclaimed gambler of sorts, but he didn't gamble for bits. He bet on people's hearts. He bet that they could be better, stronger, and happier than they were. And he was always right. So, do you know why he was always right?" Twist only shook her head, terrified. "Because he made his bets come true. He could awaken the best in any pony. I was proud to have him as my friend, and we were always together. I'd watch him perform card tricks with his magic, or more frequently, we'd venture out into the Everfree Forest," she said. "We were kids, after all. They told us we shouldn't go near it, and so the forest attracted us. One day, we found a big fortress in the woods." Twist's eyes grew wide, and Cheerilee nodded with a grin. "That's right! You're inside the Everfree Forest right now. We spent days looking for a way in, but we couldn't find any. Until one day, we found a gem, just lying outside in the woods. We took it along with us, and once we got closer to the fortress, the doors opened. We started exploring it, every room and hallway. We concluded it had been the remnant of darker times, for we mainly found implements of torture and deactivated traps." As Cheerilee lost herself in the story, she started paying less attention to her knife, and Twist squirmed as the tip pressed lightly into her chest, the crimson bead of blood welling up around it. It was nothing compared to her shoulder, but it still hurt. The interior was illuminated by magic, and Ace's own magic failed to work inside. Needless to say, we were fascinated. We found secret hallways and rooms, many of which contained the mechanisms operating the traps. It was the adventure of a lifetime. Twist breathed a sigh of relief as Cheerilee lowered the knife, supporting herself against the wall behind Twist as she bowed her head. "And then, one day, Ace died," she said in a barely audible whisper. "It was my fault. The traps, I didn't turn them back off properly." She shed a few tears, to Twist's great astonishment. She wanted to say something, but was afraid of what Cheerilee would do if she ruined the moment. "I never told any pony. How could I have? His family moved away soon after that. They think he just went missing, up to this very day. And that's when I realized something. I realized that if I was going to atone for his death, I needed to become like him, better than him. I needed to make ponies grow, foster their strengths, guide their abilities." "And so you became a teacher?" Twist asked quietly, both scared out of her mind and moved by the story despite herself. "Yes, and I was doing fine, helping ponies, redeeming myself, forgetting Ace and moving on. "Until your friends came along and ruined everything," she said with a snarl. Twist shrieked as Cheerilee suddenly pressed the knife against the top of her midriff, making a small, horizontal incision. "No, please, please wait!" The filly stammered at the pain, making sweat purl down her face. But Cheerilee seemed to be done talking and paid her no heed. Using the incision she had just made, she quickly dug the tip of her knife underneath the skin and started cutting downwards. Twist squirmed and let out a variety of gurgling noises as her belly was sliced open, gradually revealing the organs that rested inside. Blood dripped down Twist's body, coloring her own and Cheerilee's fur red in several places. Cheerilee was careful not to damage any of the organs within, and she stopped once she had reached the filly's belly button. Twist grunted as the mare pulled back and discarded the knife nonchalantly. Twist clenched her teeth against the sickening sensation radiating throughout her lower body. And for just a moment, she felt so out of it that she didn't even notice Cheerilee had gone off to fetch something from her bags, until after she had shoved it in front of her face. "See this?" Cheerilee asked gleefully as she held up a glass jar filled with little, milky white balls. "I don't suppose you know what these are?" Twist only grunted miserably in response. Cheerilee frowned with disappointment. "No, not quite. These," she said as she tapped the glass, "are eggs. Everfree beetle eggs. Incredibly hard to find, but I got them just for you. Aren't you pleased?" I've never heard of," Twist said weakly, as she attempted not to throw up at the thought of the hole in her stomach. "They're not actually beetles, you know," Cheerilee explained as she took the lid off of the jar. "The pony who named them did so based solely on their appearance. But there's important differences. They're venomous, for example. That's different from poisonous, mind you. And their reproductive cycle is so fascinating. Want to hear about it?" Twist had a feeling that, whatever Cheerilee was going to say, it would probably be bad news. Not that Cheerilee cared much for her captive's lack of response. She seemed far too busy enjoying herself to get tied up with petty details like that. "You see, the females lay their eggs inside of other, preferably living, creatures. Like so," she said as she roughly kept opening the hole in Twist's stomach with a hoof, dumping the contents of the jar inside. Twist screamed as Cheerilee manhandled the cut in her belly, and the feeling of hundreds of little eggs raining down upon her innards was enough to finally make her spew all over herself. Cheerilee seemed to have expected that, as she had already jumped well out of the way. She reappeared in front of the coughing Twist with a needle and thread, which she promptly put to good use by coarsely sewing up the filly shut, which elicited a whole new series of whimpers from her victim. And when they hatch, the larvae feast until they are fat and healthy. Then they rest inside their victim to regain some energy, only to eat the host and swarm out a few hours later, to go looking for new breeding grounds," Cheerilee said, before breaking out in the most wildest, maniacal grin possible. No, this can't be happening," Twist pleaded with fate, her imagination already making her feel thousands of little legs crawling around inside of her. "Oh, don't worry. They'll find the innards to be tastiest, so you won't die right away," Cheerilee said as she drew closer and whimpered into Twist's ear. "Now, I have some traps to go inspect, but I'll be back in a few hours to watch them be born." She took back Twist's glasses and started walking towards the door. "No, Twist whimpered. But hey, don't tire yourself out, worrying too much. No, she repeated more forcefully, her eyes widened in disbelief. Because, Cheerilee said as she passed the door, you're already dead anyway. No! Twist yelled as the door fell shut, but there wasn't any pony to save her. Any pony to hear her cries.